Welcome to Season 2 of the Ambitious Broker Podcast, the real estate industry's #1 show covering the most important insights and principles you need to succeed in your career. This show is brought to you by Escrow Technologies, committed to delivering an uncompromised escrow experience since 1983. Visit escrowtech.net for more information. Please welcome the host of the Ambitious Broker Podcast, your real estate industry mentor and coach, Roger Hance.
Welcome, folks, to Ambitious Broker. We're here today with a great guy, a great guest, Andrew Manning, superstar. And, you know, real quickly, we just started talking, Andrew. We started this Ambitious Broker program with the idea that we can bring people like you close to people who are ambitious and trying to, make things happen in their lives. I had and I tell the story occasionally, but I had a mentor when I first started, a guy by the name of Dick Farrell. Did you ever know that name, Dick Farrell?
Know the name, yeah.
Well, Dick Farrell was a really big producer around here, but he was a young guy. I was 21 when I started. He was probably 35, but I'd heard about him. He worked at a different company. I called him up one day and just said, "Hey, I heard about you. Could we talk?" And the guy was gracious as hell. He let me. He said, "Sure, let's go have lunch." So we had lunch, and from that day on, we became great friends. And he was there like a brother the whole time. Big farmer, and he had me door knocking and so forth. But I always thought, and then when I started my company, I built my company around farming. It really became the core sort of methodology that we preached and practiced, and so much of my life goes back to having one lunch with one guy one day. And I just called up, and just fortunately he was that guy. So that's where this idea came from. How do we have lunch? How can I get a lot of people having lunch with people that are very productive, iconic, and go from there? So that's why you're here today. And a little background on you is you basically won everywhere there is to win. Can we put it that way?
Try it.
Well, I don't. You were what, 13th in the nation, or
I think last year 13th globally. Yeah, lucky 13 for Berkshire Hathaway worldwide.
Not bad, but you've been doing it since
86. Yeah. I was in college, got my license in college, working 2-3 jobs plus real estate, and literally working like 16 hours a day and studying and trying to get through school.
So it was in college, during college?
Got my license at UCLA, yeah.
Wow. So every year, basically, you've gotten involved, and then you started doing big numbers, and then you got rich, and
Tried. If I'd saved some of the money from the few bad markets, it would have been great.
Yeah, I know, I hear that. But did you ever just want to, say, some January 1st, wake up and say, "I think I'll just have a shitty year. I'm going to do bad. I'm going to do bad this year"?
I always
ever enter your mind?
It's still, even 35 years in, I still think of the agent that talked to me when I first started in real estate. She goes, "You're only as good as your last closed escrow." Yes. So you always think that this one's going to be the last one. I remember being devastated when deals would fall apart in the beginning, and now I don't even count commissions or even figure out what the commission is until the closing statement, crosses my desk. I don't even pay attention to it because you don't have what you never got. So if it doesn't close escrow, people say, "Oh, I lost this or I lost that." You never had it because it didn't close. So move on to the next. It's like if you get caught up in that negativity, it'll just sink you. So it took me a long time.
One of my rules in real estate I talk about with people is that you can't be the most motivated person in any transaction. And that's a really important place to get to.
Right.
Because it's what you're saying, really.
Right.
The deal's going to make or it's not going to make. Let nature take its course. Buyers and sellers have their own motivation, and help them with their path.
Right.
But they have a sense of knowing when you're too motivated.
100%. It's like they can sense desperation, and whether it's a buyer or a seller, and if they think that you're out for your own best interests and not theirs, it's a complete turnoff, and it demotivates them from both sides of the transaction. So what I usually do with the seller, if it's a situation, a credit back or something, or taking a lower price than they want, I put the ball in their court, and half the time they'll say, "Hey, what would you do?" And I said, "Well, it's not my house, but if I were you, I think about these 3 choices. Here's what you got." I have one recently now where we're talking about taking, $200,000 less than the last offered, but it's probably the reality of what it's worth. And I said, hey, we can put it back on the market. I fully support your decision 100%, but there's no guarantee. I said, there is a risk that if we go back on the market, that it's going to be for a lower price, and they're still going to want all the same stuff fixed and the same credit. So I said, you've got a bird in hand now that can close in 10 days, or you can take your chances and see what happens. Completely up to you.
Yeah. I was doing a class one day. I asked to come speak at a meeting, and there were maybe 50 people in the room. And one of the things I said to people was that, I always would tell my sellers that, it's you're the decision maker in the relationship here. I'm just here to help you with some info. That sounds kind of like your ideology. I
call myself a facilitator. So I'm like,
yeah. And I had a lady in the audience stand up and say, I would never let my client think they're in control. And I thought, well, who decides they're going to sell? Are you the one who's going to sign the contract? And so it was kind of funny how she abused me for a little bit about that. And it's but I've known of you for a long time, of course, and but only formally met you probably 6 years ago or something.
Right.
And I met you because I had become president of the association, and we had decided to come up with a new award. And the award was what we referred to as an icon award, kind of how we got the idea of this as an icon series, part of Ambitious Broker. But so as we started researching that, and what it meant was this, and I'm not a popular guy in the world of the association because I think too much on my own, I guess, or something, but they have an award every year called the Realtor of the Year Award.
Right.
And no one like you ever wins that award. I have never won the award. And generally, so one of the things I said, I'm not dying to win the award. I don't want to be misunderstood, but I always felt like the people in the business who are conquering the business, who are doing great in the business, those are the people that I think should be considered Realtors of the Year. The other people could be the Volunteer of the Year or whatever you want to call it, and we've had an ongoing battle about that. So when I became president, I said, well, if we can't be Realtor of the Year, we'll be Icon of the Year. That's somewhere above Realtor of the Year. And so let's go find some. And so started doing some research, and it was really interesting that a lot of times that people do really, really well in the business don't often necessarily have a great reputation with others in the business, jealousy and so forth. And it was interesting because everybody likes you. What are you doing wrong here?
Yeah,
Why aren't you making anybody mad? And everybody, seriously, as we started researching various people, and of course you were given one of those awards, and you seem to have been able to be very productive, at the same time continue to have respect from people in the industry. And why is that? Why are you able to do that?
I've always prided myself on my reputation. I remember trying to establish myself in the beginning. I didn't know any realtors. I didn't know anything. So started my business, doing open houses like a lot of us. And so at the open houses, I thought, well, how am I going to get to know these people? And how am I going to pick up clients? Because, of course, as usual, it seemed like everybody had an agent. So I just started this thing where I would say, oh, are you working with a broker? And they would say, yes. I said, well, who's your agent? And they would say, oh, I'm working with Sally so-and-so, Coldwell Banker or what have you. And I would say, oh, my God, she's wonderful. Please tell her I said hi, and you're in excellent hands. And I got more phone calls back. I didn't know Sally. I didn't know these people, but I thought I might as well throw out a compliment to them. Right. People were so shocked that I wasn't trying to steal their client that they got to know me and say, wow, this guy must be really nice. Then the bigger agents would be like, do I know him? Maybe I know him and I forgot, or have we met? Some people would be honest enough to say, have we ever met? Right. And I said, no, I know of you and I know your reputation. So I was kind of putting positive vibes out there and started that way so that everybody started to get to know me as, the nice guy who doesn't try to steal their clients. And it also worked in my favor by some people saying, oh, honey, who's our agent? What's her name? What's his name? I said, well, it sounds like that's working out great for you guys if you don't even know your agent's name. I said, well, here's my card. I said, if it's not working out for you, please give me a call. And I picked up several clients that way, just who said, hey, you were so nice, you weren't pushy, we, it wasn't working out with our agent. We decided to give you a call. So I got quite a bit of business that way, but at the same time kind of built my reputation as, being a nice guy, because it can be kind of cutthroat in our industry. Even in the 80s when I started as a young agent, different
That's particularly
systems.
true. Also, I mean, the last 2 years with 30 offers on everything. I mean, I've noticed, it brought out some interesting.
Wow. I mean, a lot of
character
cocky
observations, huh?
young agents that, I always say that it's the era of the people that you're lucky if you even get a text. Like, forget about email. Nobody answers their phone. It's like they only want to text you, 2-word texts or whatever. And so my other big thing I do with clients is I always try to check, no matter what their age range is, what their preferred method of communication is, because I think you got to establish that right up front. There's certain people who only want to be texted. There's certainly people who only want email. And a lot of old school people would really want you to pick up the phone.
Right.
And if there's ever an issue, like, don't get into a text war with people. It's like, pick up the phone and call them. Even if you have to leave a message saying, hey, I'd rather not do this by text. I just want to kind of talk this out. Let me know when you have a minute and give me a call or something like that. Because people get so into these texting and then they start these text wars with each other.
Absolutely.
And you're like, what is this? Same thing goes with somebody says, oh, I never said that. So even if I send a text for something, I always back it up with an email so I have a cleaner record, because it's tricky to do those text chain messages.
I mean, I get in a fight with my wife over misunderstood texts. You know what I mean? It's like,
you got to be really careful in text, because
these are real simple issues that my wife and I are dealing with.
Yeah.
Now you're talking about buying a house, and the other thing too, I don't know if you've experienced this, but I know I hear it through escrow a lot, is that there's now 15 people on email chains. It's this person's assistant, the TC, and the this and the that, and that has caused some communication quagmire, let's say. It's
well, you got to be careful about the emails you're forwarding, because sometimes people don't realize that it will pick up all the previous emails. So if you've said something in a previous email, it gets forwarded, and you're reading these long email chains. You got to be careful. Start a new chain. My other favorite thing to tell new agents and even existing agents is, please change the subject line of the email so you don't have 50 emails with the same subject line. So if you're going back and looking for a home inspection request, or you're looking for resolution or a certain document, change the email title, because you go in those when you're checking for an email, and you got to now go through 50 or 60 emails to find the one you want.
Right.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah.
So simple. Little things are so
things.
simple, but it makes a world of difference.
Yeah. Let's go back. I want to start with, you were in college. Did you have previous work before that? I mean, jobs?
Yeah, no, I started, it's like, I like clothes and cars when I was growing up. And when I was 13, my sister's best friend's dad owned the 31 Flavors in Tarzana.
Right.
And so my first job is, I think I was like 13 and a half. I probably was not even supposed to be working, but I'd get on my skateboard, and it was 2 blocks from my house, 3 blocks. So I'd skateboard to work. And then by the time I was 16, I worked there for 3 years. Most people would probably do a summer job, but I worked there for 3 years, during junior high and high school. And by the time
that was your first career.
By the time I was 16, they made me staff leader. It was my title, and I'm in charge of these, people in their late 20s who are smoking pot in the ice cream freezer, and I'm like trying to handle the crowds out in front. I'm 16, you go to the market, get bananas, do this, do that.
Right. That's funny.
So I did that, and then I went from there to retail. I worked at Saks Fifth Avenue, Woodland Hills, during high school, beginning of college, and then I switched over to a law firm in Century City, a family law firm where I ended up selling half the attorneys' houses and their kids and stuff over the years. Yeah, did that for about 3 years. At the same time, I was studying for my license, and in my second to the last year at UCLA, so I did all that at once.
So when you're working at the retail outlet, that's a big, interaction with consumers coming in and out, and you're just, like you said, you're a nice guy, and you come off really, really nice. Did you develop some of that? Or just kind of, this has just always been your nature?
I was super shy as a kid, so it's like, to me, it's like between doing retail jobs and being in the public eye, and then when I started in real estate, I had a friend who was the president of the chamber of the Studio City Chamber of Commerce, and he was the president, so he got me involved in, why don't you come on and be, on the committee? Then it was treasurer, then it was vice president, then it was recording secretary, and then he got sick and got cancer and was dying, and literally deathbed wish. He's like, nobody wants to be the president. Will you take it over? This was like 1991 or something, right when the market was dipping in the 90s. So I had extra time. I thought, I really don't want to do that, but got on board. There was a wonderful woman who ran the chamber at the time, and she was like, look, you'll be fine. She was sort of like the behind the scenes gal, and she just kind of pushed me in the direction, directed me with what I needed to do. You know, she'd write speeches for me. And pretty soon, I did it for 3 years. So pretty soon, I'm cutting ribbons at opening of stores and stuff, but that gave me great public speaking experience and made me feel more comfortable in front of a group. And pretty soon I was like, no, I don't need a script. I'll just, wing it as we go. Just give me, who am I meeting? What's their names? And she would come up behind me like movie stars or politicians and say, this is so-and-so, that's so-and-so, this one owns this store, that one's the president of this. So it's like she's whispering in my ear. We didn't have the security earpieces at the time, but it was great. And then I got more comfortable with public speaking, and that also helped me in my career because you're meeting a lot of strangers when you're walking on listing appointments, or you're meeting new buyers for the first time.
Well, I think that's one of the things that has always interested me because, excuse me, is that no one's really born to do this, I don't think. I doubt, being a shy person, you saw yourself as a real estate agent at 18 years old or 20 years old or whatever.
Never.
Yeah, just too shy for that.
I'd be afraid to answer the phone. Like, what am I going to say? Like when I was a little kid, the phone would ring, and who's going to get the phone? I'm like, oh, look at you. She's like, I'm not answering it. I don't want to talk to anybody. but through a purposeful process,
although not with the intent to become an agent, but certainly you went through a process that brought you out of that.
Right.
You got some interaction with consumers at probably the worst kind of consumer to be dealing with too. I'm guessing, right?
Very emotional, yeah.
Very emotional, yeah. And then the next thing you know, it leads to a super career selling real estate. And it has nothing to do with learning a great closing line or learning a great, listing presentation. It really was a matter of learning how to interact with humans.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? And a good experience of that. And that's one of the things I see with new people a lot is, I get phraseologies and I get all that. I've always kind of promoted that you understand what you're doing and it will come out naturally and you'll feel better. I think you kind of, based on what we were saying, feel that way.
Correct, yeah.
So you went through that. So what prompted you to get your license?
Well, I think as soon as I had a car and I was driving around, I was see the open house signs, and I always liked cars and houses. And I think my parents used to buy and redo houses and apartment buildings when nobody was doing that in the 70s. So I'd follow my mom around and she would do her thing. And then when I got a car and was driving in the 80s, I would be like, oh, I'm going to go check out these open houses.
Interesting.
And my mom's realtors, a couple of guys who were a couple, and these guys who drove Mercedes convertibles. They're always in Hawaii. And I thought, being shallow, I want to do what these guys are doing. Wish it was that easy. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
I remember the 80s when we could all go out to lunch every day, and there was the contract was 3 pages long. Right. That was a whole different ballgame. But
inspired by that, right?
Yeah, I got really inspired, not only by them because they were a successful couple, but then when I saw, people in these open houses, it was interesting. As a teenager, I'd go in and they'd be like, I of course say I'm looking for my parents, and these realtors would be very intrigued, like, what's this 16, 17, 18-year-old kid doing coming to open houses? Yeah. But I knew I like cars and houses, and I figured, I'm not going to make any money selling cars, so I think I should move into the houses. So I thought about doing that since.
Was there an agent that you had met that kind of helped move you along a little bit? Or
interesting.
Was it just...
Other than my parents' agents, it was sort of random at the time. And when I first started getting into it, I interviewed at different offices, and I'll never forget. I'd gone on a student trip with a whole group of politicians on this, which kind of started my love for travel. So we went on this 6-week trip to Southeast Asia, and it was to promote the Olympics and a breeding program with a friend of my mom's who was the head of the LA Zoo. So one of the very influential people, we went on this 6-week trip. So we go to Hong Kong, and we're like, oh, you can have a suit made. I'm like, oh, a suit made. Here I am. I'm like 18 years old. I have a suit made. So I had this gray sort of, what the hell material was, but it was like a sort of a silk gray, raw silk suit, very tailored. And so I wore that to all my interviews with a purple tie, very fashion forward. And I remember that when I went to my eventual first office, Fred Sands Studio City, several of the people now, oh, we saw you walking. We're like, oh, this guy's going to be good. Yeah. This guy's going to be good. What's he all dressed up for?
Yeah. Well, you got the physique for that too.
I try. Yeah. It's hard to maintain. I'm a big fitness buff and spinning guy and cycling and hiking and that kind of stuff. I think that's the other big part of our business. So stressful that you got to have some kind of a release. If I don't get up and exercise first thing in the morning, I don't have the right.
And do you every day?
Right day. I try to almost every day. Yeah, try to every day. Either spinning, elliptical, take a hike, whatever it can be. I missed the indoor spin classes because I was like an addict to that. But since a lot of that's faded away in the pandemic, I got the Peloton,
That's
day
funny
one.
Because my wife is, I was the jock. I played football, baseball, and did all that stuff in school. And my son played football in college. And my wife is just so unathletic. But she gets on a bike and she just destroys me.
That's great.
Just destroys me. It's really interesting how you can be, not athletic and be really good at that, because she's really good at it.
Yeah, I love the road bike I keep up at our other place. So I ride bikes up in San Inez area, but I don't down here. It's just too much traffic.
Okay, so 1986, you finally decided to get your license, get in the business, and you get into Fred Sand's office in Sherman Oaks, I think you said.
Studio City.
Studio City. And I don't think Fred Sands had a formal training program per se, like Coa Banker would have a 3-week thing.
No, you had a mentor. You had a mentor, and you shared your first 3 deals with your mentor. And I had Milt Jones. You remember him? He was big on the board. He was my mentor. Very straight-laced conservative, and I have a great sense of humor. And it was sort of blossoming at the time. And he was like, "We gotta be serious. Got to be serious." So he was like dead serious. So
right. He goes, "Wear your suit."
My first open house. I'm sitting by myself in Studio City, a little Spanish house for. Nobody listening will believe it, but I think it was $199,000 in 1986 in Colfax Meadows. I'm sitting this open house by myself, and 3 separate buyers came in at different times, all unrepresented, all wanted to buy the house. So I think even Milt hadn't ever seen that before, and he's like, "We got to be ethical. We got to find 2 agents to pick the one you think is the most likely to buy it." And I'm like, "What do I know? They all seem like nice young couples." So I kind of made the good call, picked the couple I thought was most likely to buy it and pay the price, and then farmed the other 2 out to 2 agents in the office. They all wrote offers. I got the sale. And then weirdly enough, the other 2 people came back to me. I sold another one a house. And the other couple I worked with for almost 3 years as the market was going like this in the late 80s. Ended up selling them a townhouse because I got priced out of the housing market.
Because the price did that, their house did that.
But I kept those 3 buyers. It took me 3 years, but I sold all 3 buyers.
Interesting. So that was week 1?
That was probably 3 months in, maybe, by the time I did my first open house,
Right. So what'd you do the first 2 months?
First 2 months, it was interesting. I just sat, it was in the days when everybody was in the office. Today's a little different because everybody's out of the office. But in those days, everybody was in the office on the landline. It was the days when people had messages on their voicemail of their cell phone, or that was on their voicemail in the office. If it's in an emergency, you can call me on my cell phone. I laugh at those. Now no one even calls the office. So I would just sit around and I thought, hey, I'm going to shut up and listen because most people talk too much. So I just really listened. I sat right near the top producer in the office who became Connie Nelson, who became a mentor to me, who was like a legend. Her time recently passed away. But so I'd listen to her on the phone and I would be like, and her assistant told me, she had this trick that whenever she was thinking about her commission or trying to resolve a problem, she would rub her thumb together. So I would look over there and I'd see her, and then sometimes I'd see her like this with 2 thumbs going, she's really working hard on this way. So I developed my own thing when I was trying to do negotiations, and I still do it today. That sounds crazy, but so when I'm really thinking about the ultimate goal, which is of course closing the deal, but trying to make everybody happy at the same time, I kind of envision this green dollar sign on my forehead. So sometimes I'll be sitting there on the phone and I'm going like this. And I'm thinking, and then I know to myself that if the vision is not coming through and I've given it my all and it's not going to happen, rarely do I throw in the towel, but it's taken years for me to realize, what, this deal is not resuscitatable, if you will. Right. This is not going to happen, and there's a certain point where you got to cut it loose and
you
move
take the
on.
sign down there.
It's out of your control. The sign's off, and we're on to the next. But like I said, I used to keep a chart that another agent in the office gave me when I was a new agent. It had been Xeroxed 1,000 times, but it was basically like the address, the sales price, what your commission was going to be, and then I kept a running total, like handwritten, before the computer days. And I would keep a total of what I had sold and what the commission was in a running column. And so when I closed an escrow, I would get the check and I'd get my little ledger out and I'd hand fill it in. And I said, look, this is how much money I've made. So I really kept track. Now I don't keep track at all. Now
I did the same thing.
Did you?
I sure did, yeah. I sure did.
But people, I wouldn't do it. Like even then I didn't do it until it closed. Like today, I think a lot of agents are like, oh my God, I'm making 20,000 or I'm making whatever the number is, but you're not making anything until it closes. So the goal is concentrate on the deal, not on the dollars, because too many people concentrate on the dollars and skip over the deal. And if you're not paying attention to those points along the way, you're going to lose the deal.
How much better are you at handling a transaction than you were in your second or third year in the business?
I think you get the same excitement and the same disappointments, but I think your mindset's so different because you've got that experience under your belt. And I know this is something difficult for newer agents, because I just talked to a friend of mine who's has a newer agent friend in Maryland, so different marketplace. But she was talking to me, and interesting to hear what some of these newer agents are doing. And so she was asking about, like, why did you get started and how did you get into the luxury market? And I said, well, part of it was, blind luck, because prices started going up and I had clients that started moving up. So I sort of pushed myself into
it, and then prices went up.
And prices went up. Yeah. So, but I told her it was interesting. So she said, I don't know what to do. I go in on these appointments and I haven't sold any of these big houses. And I said, I'll tell you what I used to do. I said, I'm not going to lie to anybody, but I used to take brochures, or I would take listings from our office, the printout, and I would say, I want to show you some of the things that our office has sold in your neighborhood.
Right.
And people hear our office, but half the time they're thinking it's you. I'm not going to say it's me. If they come right out and ask me, I'm going to say, no, these are my colleagues in the office, or this is my good friend, or this is, my associate, whatever you want to call it. But if you give that impression that wherever you're working at whatever company, that this is what you're selling in their neighborhood, and you don't have any track record as a newer agent, I think it's a great thing to come in, because it gives you some level of confidence. You're like, oh, I don't know anything about the neighborhood. I mean, you got to research, be prepared for the questions when you come in, know the neighborhood, know what's sold, not just in the last 2 months, but maybe the last 2 years.
Probably the biggest change in real estate, and I don't mean as a salesperson so much, although it affects them, but as a business owner who, I spent 20 years running a company, and whatever it was, 14 offices and hundreds of people, you pick up experience. Like you said, your transactional knowledge now is so different than your third year, and I try to tell people all the time that consumers need to understand the value of that experience. I'm not sure that they always do, but in those days, when you could walk in and say, this is my company. I started with Forrest Olson, right. Which became Coldwell Banker. But I remember when I walked into an office or a house back in those days, the consumer value in that brand was so high. I looked 13 years old at the time, and had no credibility. But to your point, I would say, it would be, this is, well, over the years, the industry's evolved to where, it's me, and
right.
and they try to encourage you to think of your business as you individually.
Mm-hmm.
But the more you become individual, the more difficult it is to create differentiation. And to your point, in those days, Fred Sands had a great name. You could walk in and say, I'm one of a dozen companies that matter,
right?
Not one of 10,000 companies that matter. Today we have 10,000 members of the Southland Regional Association of Realtors. And so by today's standard, you have 10,000 companies.
Right.
It becomes very difficult to try to do that differentiation, But I was always kind of like you. I love the idea that I could say, this is me, this is us. Us
right.
felt bigger and better, and I'd love to see some of that come back into real estate.
It'll be nice. I think it's become so impersonal, and it's like, especially, there's some great new agents out there, but some of these hotshot new agents, and everybody's geared into HGTV and $1 million listing
right.
and selling LA, and they think this is all glamorous, and everybody the women all walk around in 6-inch heels and
right.
and stripper tops, and
right.
they're all selling $20 million houses. It's probably not reality for sure, but the average person watching, especially out of the LA area, thinks, oh my God, this is so glamorous, and everybody makes millions of dollars. It isn't reality. I think the average agent, especially in our marketplace, is right. very hardworking, but people are not living like that, and I think
yep.
it's a distortion of reality.
I agree. I really do agree. I think it's, in some ways, it hurts us a little bit. So you really get in, you jump in open house, and you have success right away doing mm-hmm. that, and that's something that carries through today too. Right. That's one of those things where. I know people, I spent a fortune on newspaper ads every month, and our agents would sit on the floor, and so that would be a good way to seed their beginning. And that doesn't exist anymore. agents come in the business today, and you think, how do you get seated? And open houses is still a really good way to do it.
Yeah, it's hard. Usually what I tell newer agents too is that, and I'll do that sometimes myself if I'm sitting in open house, the average person coming in is probably coming in from Redfin or Zillow, potentially a search from their agent if they're working with the buyer's agent.
Right.
But so many, especially the younger that you gear it, the more they're like, they just put themselves on a Redfin search and they go over. And a lot of these people are just looking to deal with the listing agent because they think they're going to save money. Or I have a very sophisticated client that's like in the $4 to $6 million range, and she's looking from like Encino to Santa Barbara, so she's all over the board.
Right.
And so she finds this house in Santa Barbara, and I told her, I said, I can help you in Santa Barbara, licensed in California, I can go anywhere. But we were talking about, she finds this house, and this is a very sophisticated person. She goes on to Redfin, and she sees the Redfin agent light up. So she says, I called what I thought was the listing agent because she popped up next to the house. And this is a common misconception that we do. So it was a young, I'm sure very nice girl from Redfin. And she says, I knew he was in trouble when we walked into this $5.5 million house. And the agent that I called says, oh, look, it has a pool. And I'm like, she goes, well, who are you? She points, she goes, I'm the listing. And she goes, well, who are you? She goes, I'm the agent you called from Redfin. And she's like, I felt so embarrassed. And then the woman got a hold of her husband's cell phone and was just texting and calling day and night. You better hurry up and write an offer. Let's get together tonight. Let's do it right now. And then finally she had to tell her that, they were on hold, and I had to educate her, because as working with buyers, you have to educate them, that, hey, when
Their
it pops
process.
up on Zillow, these are pay-to-play positions for
Right.
Redfin or Zillow. So if you look up a house, I always tell them, look up a house on Zillow and see the 1 or 3 agents that pop up on the right-hand column, and then look that same house up 10 minutes later. It'll be 3 different agents, because it's like a roulette wheel. They're paying for the chance.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I know, I've been, and I hate to admit it, but I really have despised Zillow. I think it's been horrible for the industry. I think it's horrible for consumers. I've heard agents that are defending themselves against a Zestimate in Zillow or something. It's like, and then we've given them credibility. And so anyway, I've been on that bandwagon for a long time. And when this, probably 10 years ago, 9 years ago, there was a broker down in San Diego, and he did this YouTube video that he sent out virally. And it was all about why I'm against Zillow as a broker. And his number one reason was, I know your house as a listing agent better than anybody does. I want the buyer to call me.
Right.
And let me explain the nuance of your home and what makes your home special. And that has stopped happening. Sign calls, what's your experience with sign calls now relative to 10, 15, 20
Phenomenal.
years ago?
Sign calls used to be a number one, thing, because people would drive by and, oh, look, there's a house for sale. But now it's so immediate with the internet and these sites, everybody's on, boom, boom, boom. As from the listing angle, when I do a listing appointment now, I've, instead of trying to guess, because I know that they're looking at these estimates. So I run the Realtor.com, Redfin, Zillow, and Trulia estimates in every one of my presentations. And it's fascinating that when you get into a gated community or a neighborhood where the houses are very similar, or maybe a tract, they're usually pretty spot on, because it's easier to value that algorithm. But when you're in custom home areas, you can have, especially in the luxury marketplace, you can have $1 million difference in these estimates. So by being able to go in and explain that, hey, each company uses their own algorithm and they don't have any filter mechanism for view, condition, there's no, like I tell people, they're like, I don't want to see any ugly houses. I said, unfortunately, the MLS has not figured out a filter for ugly homes yet. So, I only want to see ugly fixers. No ugly houses.
3 bedroom, 2 baths, no ugly.
I said, it's interpretive. So some people, what you think is ugly, somebody else thinks is great, and vice versa. So I said, but I try to educate them in that regard to value by saying, hey, look, and I always tell people, look, obviously everybody harps on square footage. You need to know whether you're dealing with a buyer or seller, whether they're sort of right or left brain. The right brain people are all about dollar per square foot, and you have to follow that argument and kind of steer them towards, hey, when I'm representing a seller, I always tell them when I go in on an appointment, I said, look, we're not really selling dollar per square foot. We're selling a lifestyle of what it means to live in this home, and dollar per square foot is part of that, but it's not the be all end all.
Right.
And appraisers will focus on that. So it's always harder to sell that little house for more money than it is to sell the big ugly
Yeah,
one.
it's impossible to walk into some house and say this view is worth this. You know, it's worth more,
Yeah.
but it's really an emotional trigger.
Right.
And I've lived my house before I got married was 17 years. I lived with a view of the valley. I loved it. I loved the back. When I got married and then bought another house, had to have a view. Very, very important to me. Others, So to me,
they don't
I'd
care.
pay,
They're not going to pay for it.
yeah, I'd pay a silly amount of money for a view because I love it.
Me too. I have my first house with a view now. So
Is that right? It's great, right?
21 years later, still there. But
Still there, yeah. So and it never gets old for me.
Yeah.
But the point of the story is that it's one of those things that's very intangible. I think the takeaway from what you just said is that people are different. You got to talk to them differently, talk their language, and maybe you learned that back at the retail store someplace. Where
Right.
A little bit of that at least.
Well, it's good. You walk in on these appointments, and it's funny. It's like I try to do a little research on who I'm meeting. So if they're like, everybody in the pandemic, this is all out the window because everywhere you show, everybody's wearing Lululemon, or you come to their house and they're in, workout clothes or shorts and a T-shirt or something. So the days of coming, I'm not a suit and tie guy, but I know a lot of people are, but I don't come in suit and tie. So if I'm wearing a, dress shirt like this and slacks, that's my dress up outfit. But if I feel it's more casual.
She's dressed up for me today.
They're dressed up for you today, yeah. Don't see the jeans.
I wear a jacket for you today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm like, too hot. But yeah, usually I'll try to know, like, who's my audience? Like, is this person is, an influencer or something? I deal with a lot of these influencers because I work with a lot of business managers that have developed, relationships over the years. And a lot of these people I work with now are way younger than me, and they're influencers of some sort. I'm still getting on the bandwagon with all that. Right. But it's funny, them, they don't care. They're all going to be like you. You could come over in pajamas, and they don't care. So it's like, know your audience, because other people, if you're dealing with some politician or government official or executive or something, you're probably going to want to dial it up a little bit and try to match that profile. Yeah, and pull out the dress shoes, right?
From China.
Yeah. Usually if they see me in the office in a suit and tie, they're like, my God, who died? Yeah, it's like, what? It's like they know it's not me, right?
Right. So the sense is that your business is, you've made the biggest chunk of your business has been through that relationship building, referral kind of. And
right.
do you how do you promote the referral? Give an example. I think we were talking earlier that I created the first CRM system in real estate,
right.
And the reason I did is because as with my company, I started looking back at my sales and realizing that I got a lot of referral business, but my referral business was coming from a really small percentage of my overall clientele that I had already done business with. And I'm thinking, boy, how much did I miss by not continuing some kind of communication with those people? And it's immeasurable, but I'm sure it was a lot. And so I said, well, maybe that's a value I could have as a business owner with my agents, if I can find a way to do that follow-up for them or help them do that follow-up. And that's really where the CRM system, came about. So, and it's still the bulk of the way people do business today. But when you're starting, you don't know those connections.
Right.
You don't know even that there is a connection.
Yeah, it takes years to build. And when you're starting, it's really more of your social influence, more of your, whether it's your church, your temple, your clubs, your sports, if you're in sports, your biking club, your tennis, football, soccer, whatever it is. And especially for some of the younger people, little kids, I didn't have little kids when I was starting out. So when dealing with this situation is you're sort of involved with those people. So it's like making connections with your social sphere, if you will, and trying to influence them, letting them know that you're in the business and you're here without being overbearing. And it is a delicate balance because it's like, oh, I thought, now I get the point all the time. Oh, I thought you were too busy. Oh, I almost lost a listing in Woodland Hills the other day because the people are like, oh, wait, well, this is like $3 million. This is small potatoes for you. I said, no, this is my wheelhouse. This is not. I said, so I had to really tell them and show them. It's like, look, I do a lot of business, but I only have 5 listings right now. I got plenty of time for you. And I said, and we've had a 25-year relationship, and it's a divorce situation, so friendly divorce. But the husband, the wife says it's the husband's decision. The husband said it's the wife's, And then when I finally talked to the husband, he's like, no, I'm totally on board. And so I had to reel them back in, and it was not easy to say, hey, look at, I'm your best advocate. I mean, look at the history we've had together. Every house I've sold for you. We've sold over asking, and I found you another house to fix up, and you've sold. So we've been through 5 houses and 5 kids over 25 years. And when I kind of looped them back into the fold, the husband's comment, which was great, I thought, he goes, you know what? I talked to my wife and we decided we don't want to break up the band. So got that signed last night.
It's so interesting you would say that because I think from what I hear from agents today, particularly, more experienced, longtime agents, is I get a lot of disappointment in they lost something that was, somebody they've sold multiple houses to, they've got a great relationship with. And as we kind of play that out a little bit and think about, in your case, you were able to reel these people back in, but you had to be there at the right moment to have the opportunity to reel them back in. And what's happening today, it seems that there's so many people in the business now that there's someone trying to pop in between you and your relationship with that person all the time, almost by accident, And so because you were a relationship-based person, you kind of touched on it, but what is that balance again? Because I used to say as an example, based on this past client thing is when I went through training, people would say, you're going to make people happy and then you'll have, referral business and then past clients will come back to you and all this stuff. And at one point in time when I started teaching people, I said, it took me a long time to realize that our clients don't take a how to treat your broker class.
100%,
right?
yeah.
So you gotta, you have to go after them. It's not enough just to know them anymore.
Right.
You really have to be a little bit more assertive in those relationships. And explain that balance to me.
The best thing, it's probably my weakest point over all these years, but it's what I struggle with the most. And I find that it's probably, like you said, where I dropped the ball years ago, but it's that constant follow-up with past clients, because people think in your mind, oh, they already have a house. Well, I guarantee you they're going to sell that house. Average is still 5 to 7 years people move. Mm-hmm. But, there's all kinds of people relocating jobs, all kinds of, people going in and out of marriages, relationships. So there's constant movement in the marketplace, in any market. So keeping in touch with those past clients, I finally got on a system where I do a note card to every one of my past clients 4 times a year. I do a big holiday thing. I do a spring thing.
Do you handwrite those?
Not handwritten, but I do the one where it looks like it's handwritten. They always constant contact. They always keep in touch format. So there's a million systems out there, but I use that system just because it's kind of a no-brainer, and I can schedule it and it sends that automatically, and I'll have sort of a spring message or hope getting ready for summer. And then I do what I kind of became known for is I have this weekly newsletter email that I do on Saturday mornings, which it's hysterical because
it's very good, by the way.
Thank you.
I get it. I'm on your list.
You are? You're always on there. See that I
so
do
when I sell, I'll call you.
Every past client I have, but it's over 10,000 people on that list
10,000.
now. So it's a huge reach out, but I get all kinds of comments from every one of my past clients, every agent I've ever done a deal with, every time I get somebody's email, it goes into the system. And you can unsubscribe like everybody else. But my favorite was I have one realtor in San Diego. I keep thinking I'm going to unsubscribe, but then I want to see what you're going to say next week. So I started this
is that right?
7-8 years ago. And now I've seen I can't even tell you how many dozens and dozens of agents have sort of copycatted it.
So you write that stuff?
Yeah. So I write it.
It's not a canned stuff you're pulling off.
No. I have a social media coach that helps me with it. And then I have, right now I have 2 full-time assistants. I have one wonderful woman that's worked for me for 15 years that relocated to Kentucky, of all places, 3 years ago, and she's sort of retired and then bored out of her mind, called me 6 months later and said, hey, I can work for you remotely. And I'm like, what? And then we thought about it, and I thought, boy, all the players, you're 3 hours ahead, and it's been a godsend for me because she's 3 hours ahead. So at 6 o'clock in the morning, our time, she's clearing the email, she's answering, setting up appointments, showings, knows all the agents and everybody. When she first started, they're like, Robin, you're back. She's like, no, I'm still in Kentucky. You don't tell anybody. But so now I'm honest with people. I say I have 2 full-time assistants, one in the office and one's in Kentucky. But I said, she's 3 hours ahead. So if you have questions at 6 in the morning or whatever, she's going to answer.
I know an agent that was so, kind of good at the things that they did, that they were going to retire a few years ago. And I said, why would you ever retire? Well, I want to move out of the state. Okay. So still you have this years and years and 3,000 transactions behind
Right.
and all this stuff like that. And so I says, well, why not put together a little team? The short version of the story is he now lives on the East Coast. And since he's moved, he's made $500,000
I love it.
selling real estate here.
Love it.
Because he's maintained those relationships so much.
Yeah, so important. The relationships, I think broker relationships, escrow, title, all the people that you're working with, your team, if
Just
you will,
in general,
mortgage brokers. I mean, but really the past clients is, I think, probably the most important one that people
So do you
ignore.
treat them differently than the 10,000 that gets the email?
Oh yeah, so the regular past clients, that's every week on Saturdays, and then my past clients, every 4 times a year, they'll get just a handwritten note card, just say thinking about you, happy spring,
How about calls? Do you make any regular calling?
I will not as many as I should. I'll be 100% honest, but I think that's an amazing thing to do is just check in with people and say if you planned a lunch even once a week with a past client, your business would probably go up 25-30%.
First agent I ever hired with my company moved to Colorado, and he's a 100 deal a year kind of guy today. And he says, yeah, he goes, I get on the freeway in the morning and I drive 45 minutes one direction and I call, whatever. I turn around and come back. And so by the time I'm back, he says, I've made, maybe 45 phone calls to friends and past clients. And I do that 3-4 days a week. And that's the way I follow up.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think even if you call, you have to go to lunch with them, even if you go to coffee, or even if you just call them, people are like, and I know people are like, oh, I'm just going to text them,
He
not
says
as
half
effective.
the time he's just leaving messages.
Yeah. Most people don't answer their phone, so it's a problem. But I said, hey, it's Andrew Manning. I'm just thinking about you, and how's everything going? How are the kids? Sometimes you have to go back and make a couple of notes, like the kids' names, the wife's name, all that stuff. It's like I had one a few years ago that I called up, and I'm like, so I get a call from this guy. So I call up, and it was one of the attorneys from this law firm I was working at in college. It was actually the husband of one of the attorneys. So I'm like, how's Susan? Oh, we divorced 5 years ago, and I have a new wife. I'm like, oh, okay. So when I called it,
probably should have called them sooner. Yeah.
So oops, didn't know about that. But that's another reason to catch up. I ended up selling them a house with the new wife. So it's like now you got to transfer through. But just keeping in touch with both sides of that transaction, because that one I kind of dropped the ball on. When I sold them their house, it was in Beverly Hills, like off of Benedict Canyon. And I didn't even know they got divorced or split up, because I wasn't following up.
Right.
And, I don't track the Beverly Hills market, but they, of course, listed with the local agent, sold it, bought another house, I think, in Santa Monica. Then they split, I think. And then they went, and then they ended up renting a house.
So that cost you $50,000.
Oh, a lot, yeah. And then they ended up buying something in Brentwood where the husband was living when I met him that he'd already sold to a developer. So it's like there were like 3 deals I missed there. Not that there was any guarantee you would have gotten it, but if you had kept in touch, at least you would have had a shot. So I always consider, like, when you go on a listing appointment or somebody refers you to somebody, it's not a guarantee, it's an opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that too. So I get a sense from you that you have had what we want a geographical farm kind of thing. But really, my rule 1 in real estate is that your income is directly proportionate to how many people know you, like you, and trust you. That's rule 1 in my book. So I've always said that as long as the number of people that you're building those relationships with grow, and you're building your business.
Right.
And farming was a way to do that. I like farming because they all own homes and they're all local, And particularly in those days, I'd take 25 listings on my farm over the year, but it took 5 months to sell them. It wasn't like today. You'd have 60-day escrows. I'd have 15 signs at any one time standing in the area. That was just great for business, But the bottom line is that just getting the number of people growing that you seem to have had a lot of farms. You had a political thing.
I was all over. I really kind of concentrated in my first house that I bought in college was in a little pocket of Van Nuys. I never forgot all my friends at UCLA. They're like, oh my God, you're living in Van Nuys. Isn't that gangland, or do you have a security system? I'm like, it was a nice little, ma and pa neighborhood, Victory and Woodman, so it was just a basic little clean, simple neighborhood. But I thought, hey, I'm going to farm this neighborhood because I noticed it was all random agents. So I remember the first 4th of July, I thought, oh, I'm going to spend money. Newer agent, so I didn't have a lot of money, but I thought, okay, I'm going to order these flags because I see people 4th of July doing the flag thing.
Right.
Well, I'm not paying attention to size and volume, but I thought, okay, I think I figured in this farm was about 300 houses. So I thought, okay, I'm going to order 300 flags. And I said, I'm trying to figure out a system. So at the time I was like a rollerblader, in the 80s. So I thought, I'm just going to put on my rollerblades, go around. And I had this great idea in my head that I was going to take a ski pole and I was going to, on my rollerblades, put a hole in the lawn, and with my other hand, I'd take the flag and put it in the lawn, and I'd knock this out in a few hours, right? So I went with my partner, Steve, at the time. We're like zipping down here, and we're going to do this with the ski poles. Well,
you do the ski pole, I'll do the flag.
First of all, even then, nobody was watering their yard, so it was like cement.
Right.
And then when the flags came, they were literally like 3 feet long on a wooden pole with a flag this big. So they're all bundled up. So I've got them under my arm. I've got the ski pole in this hand. They're getting kind of heavy. Yes. And I'm a little far from the house, and there's nowhere to put these flags. I mean, it was a disaster. So I got them done, but a lot of thank yous, but probably at least 10 calls from people. You put a hole in my front lawn and blah, blah, blah. And or the flag fell over and touched the ground. You're unpatriotic. I was like, okay, that's the last time I'm doing flags.
It's funny to say that because in teaching farming, I would always say, kind of start in the middle of a block, walk one direction, cross the street, come back. And the reason is because of carrying things in your arm. It's like you can only carry so much.
Boy,
kind of make little notes.
In my head, it was easy, but it didn't.
We gave out posters one year, the big posters, little rubber bands. Long story, but the idea of carrying, and a farmer would knock on 30, 35 doors a day, when they went out. But to carry 35 posters, to your point. Now, or 3x5 cars, whatever the method was, but in Porter Ranch, the wind could be 300 mile an hour up there. God forbid you drop your cards because you're reorganizing next week. So it's
like the people that I've even seen them where they staple their card to the flag, which is a no-no, or they'll staple 2 cards on top of a flag, and then the sprinklers go on, and your card falls off. It's like it's like trying to identify yourself. It's really tricky, but I admire anybody that goes for it.
But you're farming. I mean, you farmed per se, not geographically, but with a lot of different social circles. It sounds like that's where you.
Yeah, my mailers.
So you got in. It sounds like you put yourself in the middle of stuff purposefully.
Right.
I'm going to meet people.
I had a tennis club. I had. It's like my partner Steve had 2 kids when we met, so we got involved with their AYSO thing. So we had connections from there. We got, Studio City Chamber.
You're the soccer thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now you got 15 kids on the team.
Right.
15 parents. 12 homes at least that they own.
Right.
And 3 that want to buy.
Right.
So how do you let them know without seeming like you're doing a commercial at the game? How do you let them know that that's what you do?
It was interesting when people would just want to talk to you, like they try to figure out. It was interesting in my case. It was like we're very friendly with Steve's ex-wife, so she would come somewhere. Everybody was trying to figure out. We were like the early modern families. Everybody's trying to figure out who are these people, what's the story. In the beginning, it's a bunch of whisper, and then pretty soon they're like, oh, that's cool. It's the sort of like kids get along with everybody, and her husband, and he had kids. It was a whole Brady Bunch situation.
Right.
So we just would all get to talking, and then it was fun. Then the ex-wife started referring people to us, and her husband would refer people to us. And so it became like this social circle from there. And then really interesting is I was never really affiliated religiously with any of these groups, but I became known as like the neutral broker. So the Catholics, Jews, whatever, they were like too many realtors in their circles, so they go out of their circle. So I started dealing with the Orthodox Jewish community because there's so many Orthodox Jewish agents, and I was sort of the great equalizer. I could come in and be like, oh, we can list with Andrew because he's got the reputation, knows what he's doing, but he's not part of the community, so we're not offending anybody else, in the temple or the church. So I started doing a lot of Catholic and Jewish offshoots from social groups and just in general from other clients who are like, oh, you should call Andrew. He doesn't go to the church, doesn't go to the temple, and that way you're not offending anybody. So that's gone on for years. So I just figured, I thought you don't have to be part of a certain group. Sometimes it's better if you're out of the group because you can deal with people within the group because they feel like they're not offending somebody else. Yeah.
So you're close enough that they know who you are, what you do. And I think that they have a sense of who you are too.
Right.
Because if they, from a distance, they can say, hey, that guy looks respectful, right? Or something about it that makes, me, feel some trust in that person. Any purposeful activity around that, or just you fell back on? I just want people to generally think I'm a decent guy.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I learned years ago, it's like I would see it happen with other agents. Like it takes you years to build a reputation, but it can take one bad move to destroy it. So it's like somebody in some of these unethical positions, like when I used to do foreclosures for Bank of America, not on the scale of some of these bigger agents like Stephanie and other people we talked about, but on a much more minor scale. But there were several incidences where some of these people were trying to, sell their own foreclosed properties to family members, and they got in trouble, and you're just X'd off the list and you're done, and then other people who did really unethical things, money under the table. Many times I've heard stories about somebody, shoving their own offer through when there's an offer for $100,000 more, from another buyer. They don't tell the seller about it. I mean, that's like horrific kind of situations that make us all look bad. Yeah. But once that, it's going to get found out at some point. And when it gets found out, it's like there's no coming back from that. So it's like it's not like, oh, whoops, I made a mistake, I'm going to reinvent myself. I'm probably not, unless you move out of the area. But it's like people know about these things, and it's, bad news travels fast, much faster than good news. So I think it takes a lot.
I tell people today that if I were to say, what is real estate? What do you have to do as an agent today? Mm-hmm. And I say, the short version is, you sell credibility. You don't sell houses. Are you credible? Can I believe in you? Why can I believe in you? Because that's what you're selling today.
100%.
Your credibility. Secondly, you manage information. If you can do those two things effectively, you have a chance to be okay. But at the top of the scale is, don't let your reputation ruin you.
And these newer agents, this agent I was talking to from Maryland last night, kind of refreshed it for me. And she's like, I don't know what to say when I go in there, and they want to know, like, what other listings do I have in the neighborhood and stuff. I said, when I was a new agent, I used to say the same thing. I said, what's amazing? I said, I've done such a great job with the properties I've had that all of my listings are sold. So even though I had none, so I said, all of my theoretical listings are sold. So I said, I'm ready to deal with you, and you were my only client at the moment for a listing. So you would be my only listing, so I can spend 110% of my time on you. And people were like, some people love that. They're like, oh, I'm your client. Yeah, it's like, so see, I'm working on other things, but you would be my only listing right now because everything else I've had is sold.
When I first started my farm, I'm knocking one day, Porter Valley Drive, and I see a lady walk out of a house. She has a clipboard, and she just reeks real estate agent. So when I get to the door, I just kept knocking. I got to the door, lady answered the door, and I says, did I see a real estate agent walking out here a few minutes ago? And she said, yes, you did. I said, well, that's what I do. And I got to love it, an opportunity to talk to you guys. And she says, well, give me your number, and here's ours, and I'll have my husband call you. No, she says, call my husband the next day, 7 o'clock in the morning. Really? Okay. As long as you say so. Call a guy in the morning, and he says, boy, you sound a little young. And he says, how many houses have you sold? And I says, well, yours will be my second.
Yours will be my second. That's good.
Yeah. But the point was,
that's great.
I was just straightforward. I was just honest. And then I said, to your point, but I'm so ambitious and so anxious to get to work, and you'll be the only thing I focus on, and blah, blah, blah. And the guy says, okay, come over tonight and list my house. That was my listing presentation.
That's great.
Yeah, it was just desperate.
Sometimes it's interesting because sometimes you'll be like, I have a tendency to talk too much on listing appointments. I've been on a few panels, and some well-known agents I was on this panel with a few years ago, and they said to the one guy, well, how long, what's your average time you spend on a listing appointment? And he goes, 30 minutes. I'm like, 30 minutes. He goes, they're either listing with me. He goes, I have paperwork with me. I don't do DocuSign. They either signing on the spot or I'm out of there. And then they go to me, and I'm like, 2 hours. I'm like, 2 hours. And I said, yeah, I never push paperwork in front of them on the spot. I always send it by email for review. And then I said, hey, I'm happy to get together in person, or we can DocuSign, DigiSign, whatever format you're
I'm
using.
more like you. I would take longer and I felt like that time invested saved me a lot of time down the road. less stress. People understand better.
I remember when the market wasn't as good, and we're always headed to one of those markets. But I remember when we had that old saying in our day when you'd be like, when the market wasn't great, you'd be like, oh my God, you want to be the what is it, the second wife, firstborn son, second wife, or the third agent,
right.
because
right.
you knew that those were your best positions. Because
right.
when things weren't selling right away, you'd get the agent coming in a down market who would say, oh, your house is worth $1 million. And it might have been last year, but it wasn't this year. And then as it starts to go down, by the time they get to you, and I would have come in the beginning and said, hey, I think it's $850. And then by the time they get to you and the price is $899 and it's not selling, you're
it's
like
$1.2 million now.
You're now $849. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but it would work for me to my advantage in the bad market. I would get a lot of people calling back, we should have listened to you. You were honest. And I lose a lot of listings because I try to be honest. And I'm like, hey, we can try it here. But in reality, I think you're here. And
how many do you lose? What percentage?
I would say I have a pretty good track record. So if I go into a listing, I would say I think I probably have 75 or 80% shot, being realistic.
So you could still lose 20% today.
Oh, yeah.
The great
easy.
Andrew Manning
easy.
loses 20% of the time.
It's multitudes of reasons. Sometimes it was like before I get into social media, it was like, oh, these people are going to, put me on Instagram and this and that. I'm like, well, we can all do that. So when I was late to the table and all that stuff. So I remember I was the last person I know to start texting years ago, and people would be like, didn't you get my text? And I'm like, I don't text. And they're like, we better get on the bandwagon. So I'm like, another thing to check. So I'm like,
right.
between Facebook,
right.
Messenger,
but
Instagram.
You do that stuff well. I mean, even you have an Instagram thing. I've seen that occasionally. So you've gotten into it.
Yeah, and I've gotten into it recently, probably more heavily in the last few years. But finally, I hired a great social media coach, which was like super helpful because it's like, hey, I think we should do this and teach you about best times to post and,
right.
Not to overpost and what's post worthy. And
she needed some help with
that. I need some help, just some direction in that. So we still work together every month. So she helps, structure the newsletter, and we have weekly phone meetings with my team every week, and we decide, which houses we're going to promote. We do Instagram Reels. We, what are we going to do for this particular property to promote it? And we're getting back into that where things aren't selling the first week.
Right.
So broker mentalities have to change, and that, hey, you're in this for the long haul. You got to educate your clients. This is great, but don't expect 20 offers in the first week, because unless you're priced at or under the market, you're probably going to have a lot of people looking. But I think people are starting to take a breath and pull back slightly. So we're in.
What do you think about this right now? What do you think about what's happening?
I think it's different than anything I've ever seen. I mean, I remember, in my first market change was 1990, and I remember I was working with one client who I loved, and we had redone together like 7 or 8 houses, and she was buying like 2 at a time, and I'd find her these great fixers, and she was very out of the box at the time with like, tiger print furniture and stuff, and people were like, whoa, it was like, it wasn't your
right.
plain Jane staging. She was doing really high-end, New York penthouse type of look. And we were doing stuff mainly Sherman Oaks, Studio City. So I was sitting at a house in Sherman Oaks, and it was like my second weekend of having it open. I was like, what the hell's going on? Nobody's coming. And it was like, here it is, like summer 1990. And it was like, and then everything went down. I remember we ended up selling that house like on a lease purchase or something, which I'd never even heard of at the time. And then hence that early 90s downturn, which was a training session for me, because it was like, I think 1991 was my only bad year in real estate, because that was the first year of a complete changeover in a
right.
market I had never been through before. So that was very educational.
Yeah, end of 89, I just went,
that was a horrible year for me. So I had one bad year, and then
So you had 3 years in the business by the time that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you had everything fully understood.
Oh yeah, I was already rookie of the year the first year. I'm out of the gate, hot, running, and just at the office in the days when people would be at the office till 9 o'clock at night. That kind of thing. I'd be there regularly. People would come by and like, what are you doing? We do cold calling. We tried everything. It's like
So what's happening right now, in your mind, is just another one of the changes that's inevitable.
I think it's different. I think
relax.
Between COVID, it's like COVID, we all thought the world was over when COVID started. I remember we started a group call that several agents got together, and we had this phone call.
GoFundMe.
Yeah, it was like 75 agents. We get on the phone at like, I think it was 8 or 9 o'clock on Saturday mornings, and this went on for months. But it was hard because it was like a call-in number, but there were so many people on the phone. And what do you think's going on? What's happening? And so it went on probably for 4 March, April, May, and kind of started to fade off in the summer as
Right.
people started getting busy again. But it was interesting comparing notes with people. Like everybody thought it was doomsday. And then really around May of that year, even in the height of COVID, everybody was like, who could afford it? We're like, we need a pool. We need a bigger house. We want to move. We're moving out of the area. Yeah. And it was a frenzy of, so the last 2 years have been my 2 best years in real estate in my whole career, which I know is the same for a lot of people that have been going. And then there's other people I know who it's been their 2 worst years. So it's like, it just depends. For me, it was like, I found a lot of past clients and people ready to move, a ton of buyers, way more buyers than I'm normally used to working with because I'm mainly listing.
How do you keep all of those people in play? Just the email and the notes a couple
Yeah,
of times
trying
a
to.
year?
It's interesting. I mean, to be honest, I keep myself on the Redfin search for neighborhoods that I'm looking in because it's easier for me than tracking into the MLS.
Really?
Because I'm looking from, I sell stuff up to San Ynez, so I'm looking from San Ynez, down to Palos Verdes because I've sold a couple in Palos Verdes, Paso Robles. I mean, I've
So
been
you have
all
buyers
over.
that you're going to work with really tight.
So I put
searches in.
I put the searches in for everybody. So really, I'm probably looking at on my Redfin app. I'm probably looking at 60, 70 houses a day that are new listings, or I'm tracking the price reductions, seeing what's sold. And what it reminds me when you have a lot of people you're working with is it reminds me, I'll just send them the Redfin link and say, hey, this just came on. More than half the time, like, oh yeah, we just saw that. That looks great. When can we go look at it? So it keeps me in touch with the clients.
Right.
And maybe it's not the best system. It works for me, but it's like I found that Redfin one is so easy to navigate. And I also found that most of your clients are on that app or something similar. So if, instead of like saying, don't go on the Redfin app, everybody has their own company app. Oh, go on my Berkshire app or my Coldwell Banker app. It's tough because the Redfin one has been around and it's so easy. So instead of fighting it, I'm like,
millions of bucks promoting it, right?
And whether they're buyers or sellers, I tell them, I said, look, if you see anything that looks interesting or you have questions about it, just forward it to me and I'll check it out for you. So they don't get lost in that sort of getting the
that seems to be the
internet agent.
I think you're really probably very good at that. I mean, I can see where, just my instinct with you is you have no problem gently giving people a list of instructions on exactly.
It's good. They need education no matter how, because whether it's a buyer or seller, your seller's on these apps, comparing notes, and they'll see something come out and go, well, we should raise the price because this house came out for this much. And as smart as they are, you have to educate. No, that's what they're asking. That's not what they're getting. Let's see what they get. And then as this market starts to change and you see the days on market tick away, I always tell listing clients and sellers that, days on market is your worst enemy. So if we're not picking the right price in the beginning, and I'm kind of known for what I call action pricing, where I like to put it at a price where you're going to get action to go above that price, or event pricing, some people call it, but that I'm kind of known for that. So agents,
event pricing.
Yeah, agents who create an event. So agents will come in and they'll be like, oh, Andrew always prices his things right on the money. So this is going to be a lot of activity on this property. And that's not me saying it, it's somebody else. So when you build up a reputation, it's like when they say, agents will say, oh, how do you get your clients to, every one of your listings is so beautiful. And I'm thinking to myself, there's been quite a few dogs that have trotted across the screen, but they don't remember those. They remember the good ones. So it's kind of educating down to the basics of let's present your house in its best light. 99.9% of first views are online now, especially with the pandemic. So they only know what they see online. And if you're not looking great, I said, this is like online dating for houses. If they're swiping the wrong direction, they're never coming back to your house.
Right.
So you want to look good so that they want to see you in person. They want to set up that meeting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and if you don't, your house doesn't look good. I mean, we've all seen these photos. There's some, I have one I'll send you when we're done. I have a blurb that somebody wrote. I'm like, does no one proofread these things? It's hysterical. But yeah, the photos, these horrible pictures online, you're like, really? It's like, this looks horrible. Why didn't they show the bathrooms? Why aren't they showing the bedrooms? It's like, I have one listing like that now where it's just there's too many boxes and we can't move everything out, but they need to sell the house. So I did some decent cell phone pictures, but I'm getting a lot of calls from online buyers who are like, well, let me know when you have the rest of the pictures of the rest of the rooms and we'll come look at it. I'm like, we're not going to have pictures of the rest of the rooms. It's a look now or forever hold your peace.
You saw the rest of the house, you'd never come out.
You wouldn't want to see.
Yeah, exactly. Go back again to at what point in time did you say, I think I'm going to be pretty good at this?
I think when I first started, I felt that way like my first year. I really got into it. I enjoyed it, and I was like, it's almost like you get obsessed with not just the money aspect, but when you get into that helping people aspect and the satisfaction of something done right. Like I always say, there's no medium days in real estate. It's either a horrible day or it's a great day.
Right.
I've never had like, oh, it's okay today. It's either like, oh, this is a rough day or it was a great day. I
Right.
rarely have those in the middle ones. And now you have like 4th of July weekend. I had like just no rhyme or reason, nobody's fault, but I had like $10 million of escrows fall out of our 4th of July weekend. It was like 4 things blew up all in 3 days.
Oof.
So I'm like, that was a rough one
Where's
for me.
the
So I'm
wine?
like,
where's the wine?
exactly.
Yeah.
So I take a deep breath and I'm like, okay, been through this before. What can we do? So it's like, and I had, a client I sold something to in Santa Barbara, and it was just a problematic property. It wasn't right for her. And, looked great on the outside. And then when you start inspecting it, she had the best description. She goes, we went and sat by the pool, and they're throwing in the pool furniture, and there was a towel laying over the chair, and I went to move the towel, and the whole cushion is ripped open. She goes, that is the metaphor for this house. It looks great until you start peeling back the layers. And so rather than, she's a good influencer client, so rather than force her to, or try to say, oh my God, no, that you got to do this, I said, I don't think this is the right move for you. And I could tell she was going to back out. And I said, I fully support, let's find something else. And she was so grateful because she said, oh my God, I thought you'd be mad. I said, I'm not bad. I said, I'm disappointed, as I know you are, because we got through this process. But, when her own designer and contractor both came up and separately in different parts of the house referred to the house as a can of worms, I mean, I knew that it was over at that point.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, we can try to resuscitate this, but this is not looking good. Yeah.
So I tell people that the cancer of real estate agents is insecurity. The idea that
That's a
in the
good point,
beginning, it wears on people, this idea that, is there going to be another deal? Is there going to be another deal? It's part of what I liked about farming, frankly, is that you could have a sense that my business is building because more and more people are knowing me. So when I'm not doing a sale, I can still feel some success.
Right.
And not feel that insecurity. So the nature of how you do business can really lead to insecurity because you're really counting on people knowing you and responding, just reaching out to you. And so why do you know that's going to keep happening?
It is hard. Like every year you think about it, and it's like particularly when you don't get a listing or you have a past client that decides to go in another direction, or favorite phrase,
right?
And you're like, oh my God, what did I? It took me years to have a frank conversation, to be educational for me, to learn. For like sometimes you don't like the call we were talking about earlier. I was able to loop that back in, but half the time you get a call, oh, we've already listed with so-and-so, somebody else. And then I have to take a deep breath. It's the ones that hide behind the email or the texting, but I always call them and I said, I'm not going to yell at them because you never know where that's going to go. Right. But I said, I really appreciate your honesty. And could you tell me, was there something I did wrong, or was, what influenced your decision? Because I like to hear what people say. And sometimes you'll get some really interesting answers. Like I get people who are like, oh, we felt like you were too busy, or we felt like, this was, too low for you, and we looked online and all your price points are higher. But, so you have to be so careful with, because some people you'll get the opposite. Oh, we say you're not selling in this price range. Everything you're selling seems to be down here. So you just have to sort of
I had a situation,
wedge that in. Yeah,
I had a situation once on my farm. I was door knocking, and a lady came to the door. I'd been there for years. Lady came to the door. She goes, "Hey, Roger," like my best friend. She goes, "I'm so excited. We just bought a rental property, our first rental property." I go, "Really?" And I said, "Well, where'd you buy it?" She says, "Granada Hills." And I go, "Why didn't you guys call me?" You're like, we're best friends.
Yeah.
You offered me lemonade half the time when I come, right?
Yeah.
And she says, "Do you do business in Granada Hills?"
Yeah.
And she goes, "I thought you specialized in this neighborhood." And then I thought, well, I turned this around. I go, I'm a really good salesperson because all of everything I put out specialized in this neighborhood. Yeah. So I truly sold this lady that I specialize in. It cost me. So to your point, I think is that the wording can be very important.
Right.
People can interpret things so differently, and you got to know the animal again.
And it's less geographical. I mean, when we started, it was like when I was in Studio City, if I went on a listing appointment in Encino, it was like another state, and people would be like, "Oh, you're Studio City, you can't do Encino." Right. Now they don't even know what company you're with. No one rarely comes to your office. Everything is so remote and in the field, if you will, that it doesn't matter. Like you get agents from, I have an offer on this listing I have in Studio City, and agents from your Belinda, and the clients are friends of his. Nobody cares. It's like,
is it better or worse now than 20 years ago?
I think it's more difficult because it's more complicated. There's more players in the field. There's 20 times the amount of paperwork.
Right.
I mean, these disclosures and these avids and the fire hardening disclosure everybody loves.
Yeah.
All those things are just so disruptive to your time period. In the beginning when it was less paperwork and you're doing everything yourself, I remember the agonizing decision to hire my first assistant. I was like, oh my God, it's like having a baby. I'm now responsible for somebody else, and I got to make enough money to pay me and pay him. And it was like, so I hired a friend, to work for me. And then it was like, I was so nervous and he was nervous. Oh, I'm living in Santa Monica, so, I'll need you to buy me a tank of gas a week. And it was like, okay, whatever. Just like, it worked out great, but that sort of got me going. But boy, that motivated me because I'm like, okay, now I got to find things for him to do. But that was the best thing when you take it to the next level, was hiring some help. Because now I don't know how people without even a transaction coordinator, you can't. Yeah. It's impossible to do.
I would do 60, 65 sales, something like that, when I was selling at the end before I stopped. And I could do that almost entirely by myself. That's impossible today.
Oh, it's impossible. I mean,
impossible.
It's like, you figure when you put a listing package together today and you're somewhere around 70 pages of paperwork just to get started. And so I've sort of taught my group that I said, you cannot send, even if someone says, oh yeah, send me the stuff online, you can't send them 70 or 80 or 100 pages of stuff online because they're like, they see how many pages and they short circuit right away. So I try to do just the basic paperwork in one batch, and then once we get the listing signed, then go for the disclosure paperwork separately, because I think it's overwhelming. So I call that the homework. So
it is overwhelming.
Here's your homework. This is the listing. That's my part.
Another problem I have with the Association of Realtors is like, we don't need to have 30-page contracts, guys. Please.
I know, it's crazy.
I push so hard just to get a letter of intent. I go, commercial does it.
Yeah.
Why can't we just do a couple pages? We'll get the basics worked out, and then we'll agree that we'll all go sign a contract.
I remember when my mom bought a house in Idaho in the late 80s, and I'm like a new agent, and I'm like, she runs up to Idaho, buys this house on a lake, and I was like, wait a minute, I got to see her contract. So she literally brings one page, and it was like 4 lines, and it just had the price, the escrow time, the loan amount, and like a day for inspection and loan contingency, and that's it. 1 page. And I was like, so I called the realtor, and I said, where's the rest of the contract? I said, where's the rest of the paper? She goes, oh, honey, this is it. We do things simple here in Idaho. And I'm like, I think I'm going to move there. And that was when it was easy.
Do you remember Buddy Bernard? Did you know him?
Uh-huh.
So Buddy there was a cable TV show here that started, Channel 6. I don't know if you remember that or not, but they had me on there with a couple people talking one day. And as I was leaving, Buddy Bernard was coming in, and he was for some other subject matter that day. And so he says, Roger, let me show you something. And he opens his jack up. He pulls out a thing that was about half of a 8.5 by 11 card. He goes, that was my first listing agreement. I go, half of 1 page? He goes, yeah, half of 1 page.
For one of the first houses I sold, an old-time broker. Do you remember Gil Lukey from Century 21?
I don't know.
Old-time guy who drove a Cadillac Coupe de Ville, and he was like gold jacket Century 21. And I sold a listing of his in Tarzana, and he had to be well into the 80s at the time. And he goes out and he goes, well, young man, congratulations, shakes my hand, and then he goes to his trunk. I'm like, what's he doing in his trunk? He pulls out a hammer and a nail with a sold sign, and he's putting it up. It's like, we had just signed the contract. I'm like, we got a long way to go. This is not sold. It's in escrow. Yeah.
Right.
Puts the sold sign up, boom, boom, with a nail, too. You couldn't even take it down.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That was funny.
Okay, so Insecurity, and but somehow you're saying, well, no, I just keep doing this, and then the fact that it keeps happening, it's like the sun keeps coming up, I guess it's going to.
Right.
That type of thing. Okay.
I think it's, you got to open your mind to that too, because if you're negative and you got a closed mindset, but it's like keeping an open mind that, the business will come to you if you put it out there that you're available.
And you were probably in some habitual process anyway of putting stuff out, saying things. I mean, there was some system, I assume.
Yeah, I think about,
so you eventually believe in the system, right?
Yeah, and I'm old school. I keep like a notebook, by the bed at night and in my office at home and everything. And so if I think of something, write it down right away. Like, call this person, remind me that. So I keep like a to-do list, and then if it gets too long, I'll start highlighting the ones that are super important. So I do, and I flip to that book many times a day, and I'll be like, forgot to call her back. I'm going to call her right now.
You're analog still.
And then I have my office text me, don't forget to call this one. So it seems rudimentary, but it's helpful to me to have like multiple reminders.
Do you use a CRM system today?
I use just the basic CRM system that we all started out with, which is just
top producer kind of
top
thing?
producer, which is just, helps me to remind me to do these things. But I also have the office remind me because I pay more attention to those texts.
At what point in time did you say, I need an assistant now?
I think when I was running around when the paperwork started to build,
Right.
and it was really before you had transaction coordinators and you had office listing coordinators, but they weren't doing all your paperwork.
Right.
But it was like, I just got overwhelmed with the paperwork, and I thought, okay, I need somebody, because now I'm buried in paperwork all night, and I don't have time to
So it started
do the
with
business.
that. Just tell me with the paperwork.
Yeah, it started probably, I think it was probably 5-7 years in before I had an assistant. It wasn't like an immediate thing,
Right.
but it got to the point when I was really, doing a good amount of business. Probably,
How many deals would that take?
I would say when I first hired an assistant, I was probably doing maybe 30-40 deals a year. Last year I
That
did
was a lot.
about 70 last year, and that was like, I can't even imagine. Now I've got a separate TC, and I've got 2 full-time assistants, because I think when you're...
So do you have a buyer's agent also?
I have one of my assistants who's great, as kind of functions as
Helps
a
you with your
buyer's
buyer.
agent too at the same time. It's tricky because with my business, I have a lot of referral buyers, and you can't refer the referred buyer twice.
Right.
So it's one of those. So if it's a referral buyer, sometimes he'll help me with those. We'll work them together. But if it's a brand new sign call or something, I'll usually have him
So your
work
team
with them.
today consists of a couple administrative people
Yeah.
and someone who helps with marketing.
Right.
You've got some part-time type of help with the social
Right,
media stuff
right.
and so forth. And then an occasional help with showing or follow-up and so forth.
Right.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good, pretty decent team. So it's gotten a lot longer than I expected, because I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, my pleasure.
Talk to me real quickly about how would you talk to a new person? I got this book here. Show you this book. It's by a restaurant, owner of a restaurant, big chain, billionaire guy.
Shut up and listen. Great.
Yeah. So he's got
great.
this book, and I will show the camera here.
That's great.
It says, shut up and listen. And through the years, boy, I can't tell you how many times I just wished I could say to these 1 and 2 year people,
You talk over. It's like what I call it happens on listing appointments, but it also happens. We've all seen it when you're showing a house, and the person showing the house, typical of some of these agents I run into, where it's like the first time a buyer's looking at the house. If I'm representing the buyer or if I'm representing the seller, I always tell the seller the first time somebody's looking at the house, you're just trying to see if it's a possible fit. They don't care about the handles on the drawers. They don't care about what kind of shelf liners you have. They don't care about how many screws there are in the door, And so many of these sellers or agents are like, oh my God, look what they did here and look what they did there. And it's too much. And the buyer starts to back up, and they can't wait to get out of the house because they feel overwhelmed and they feel like they're being pressed.
yeah.
So
Let me
they
feel
want,
the bones.
they want to get an idea. On a second showing, then you can maybe point out some of that stuff. So what I'll do on a showing is I'll just tell people, like, I walk them through once, and then this is how I tell if they're really interested. I'll say, hey, if they're with an agent, you guys are welcome to walk through on your own and take your time if you'd like to take another look. And if they're like, no, we're good, then probably not interested. But if they want to walk through a second time, it's probably a candidate, and people appreciate that sort of alone time, in a house to be able to walk around. Not if they're not with an agent because of all the, if it's an occupied home, it's a different story.
So it's an agent in your office comes up to you and goes, Andrew, of course, that's happening less and less today, right?
Yeah.
But says to you, what should I do? What's your advice to me on, one of these guys that I'd spoken to, another Icon agent, I'd ask him the same question. He goes, well, for a long time I would let people come in and I'd tell them whatever. And he goes, but I got to the point to where I said, when they come to me and ask, I say, you won't do it anyway, so go away. Leave it alone. So I said, yeah, but what would you say to them? So what would you say to someone right now? What's the most important thing for me as a new agent to become an Andrew Manning?
I think the most important thing is to put yourself out there. Like, don't be afraid to fall on your face or fail, because it's like, I had an old time saying, and I forgot who came up with it, but I would say, every no is one step closer to a yes. So people can slam a door in your face, but if you get discouraged and you wallow in the negativity, I think a positive attitude, which is very difficult these days with everything going on in the world, but positive attitude, putting yourself out there. There's some agents I know who do very well. They wear their little name tags, or they've got the the things on the sides of their cars. It's not my clientele, but more power to them if that's what's working for you. But I think it's putting yourself out there, being social, which is very difficult in these sort of COVID times, but whether it's online, in person, whatever you're doing, letting people know subtly that, hey, you're in the business, you're here to help. Even if it's friends or something, say, hey, even if they already own a house, say, there's a couple services they have like HomeBot and some of these things you've heard of where you can, it'll automatically send people sort of a market evaluation on their house from you. And so I've subscribed to that. So my past clients and people, they get a contact from me.
Gentle pokes.
And I get calls all the time. Either it's an angry call like, they're totally wrong. My house is worth much more than this. Or they'll be like, hey, do you think my house is really worth this much? And then people are like, you know what? The kids are in college. I got one of those calls the other day. They're like, I sold them my house 20 years ago. Like, do you think our house is really worth this price? If so, we're sellers.
Right.
And so it's like, it got just reaching out to people. But even if they're not your clients and you have friends, you could put their address into one of these systems. If you don't want to pay for the system, you can do it yourself and say, hey, just wanted to give you an update on, isn't this crazy? Look what your house is worth today. Maybe it's not just a friend and not even a client. It's a contact and it keeps you out there with people. But anything that gets you in front of people's email, text, the phone call. But I think just calling people like, hey, just checking and see how your day's going. I'm having a great day. I closed an escrow today, or I'm showing some property in your neighborhood, and I was just thinking about you. And have you seen the house on such and such a street because it's right around the corner?
That's a great intro, actually.
Yeah.
I just closed an escrow.
Yeah, not a direct push, but sort of around the bend where you sort of say, hey, I was thinking about you because I was driving through your neighborhood. I showed the new listing on such and such a street. Even if you didn't, you can just call up and say, I was thinking about you. I was in your neighborhood.
Well, it's a great market for that now, too, because,
more people are home, too.
There's never been a truer time to say, we just have no inventory.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about it?
Yeah.
It's like everybody's
my new one I'm using is, we're kind of in a changing marketplace. So if you were thinking about selling in the near future, this might be the time because we don't know where we're going to be in the next couple of years. And we seem to have plateaued for this moment in time. So everybody thinks it's just going to keep going up, up, up. So I said, this might be a perfect time for you to take advantage of that if you thought about making a move. Right. And then you talk about people who are like, yeah, we're thinking about moving in December. Well, hey, why don't we put the house on the market now? We'll get you a rent back till December, and that way you can capture today's market and not risk what might happen in December.
Right. Well, I'm going to let you go.
Oh, thank you. A real pleasure.
No, likewise. $2 billion worth of real estate sales later, I'm getting a chance to sit with you.
I should be retired, but that's when you don't spend all the money in the bad market.
Yeah. Real quickly, I know you were involved with cystic fibrosis. Mm-hmm. You want to take a minute to talk about that?
I met clients 1999. I sold a great house in Sherman Oaks, became very friendly with the sellers, and they were heavily involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Mm-hmm. So, and the husband's a wine writer, and long story short, I sold their house. They were building a small house up in Napa Valley, moving up to Napa Valley where they still live, and they rented my old house in Studio City while they were building this house, and we became very close friends. So we do a lot of fundraising for cystic fibrosis, and we donate our house up in Los Olivos for stays, and that was my big win, buying that house about 9 years ago, and now clients, referrals, I send them up there for a couple nights, and then they'll be like, hey, if we buy another house, can we go stay in your house again? I'm like, yeah, you can. And if we refer you a buyer,
1 week for every house you buy.
If we refer you or buyer or seller, can we go stay in your house again? I said, yeah, you can.
That's
it's like a crack dealer.
Now you're hooked.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, help yourself to the wine.
Exactly.
There's plenty of it out here.
I do that. Even if somebody sends me a referral, and I know they like wine since we collect wine, I'll send a bottle or two of wine, depending on the thing, just drop it off at their house, just thinking about you. Thank you for giving me your friend's name. They're not ready to move for 10 years, but thank you for the contact. And it's just, I put everybody on my contact list because the more people you're building up, put them on your contact list, stay in touch with them, move on to the next person. And eventually those people that have slipped down will come back across, and it creates a circular business cycle.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you.
My pleasure.
A lot of time, appreciate it. Maybe someday we get a chance to do it again. But in the meantime, people with Ambitious Broker, he's one of the best there is. So
great to be here.
Yeah, you've had a chance to hear him. Thanks.
Thanks.